Heavy winter clothing test from short barrels with Dan the Wolfman. 9mm versus 40 versus 45 versus 357 Magnum. Now this is completely Dan the Wolfman's idea. He wanted to see what all these cartridges would do out of short barrels through heavy winter clothing, and I got to admit that is a really good idea. A lot of times I'm focused on, comparing a whole box of ammo, and I rarely come out and do these little tests, but sometimes these little tests are where we get most of our useful information from. So, it's very interesting to try to see what we might get through heavy winter clothing out of short barrels with those calibers. Now, I have a bunch of layers here. I'm going to consider that 10 layers. I got like a couple of insulated sweatshirts, jacket type sweatshirts folded in half twice, and then a couple layers of snow pant material. A lot of people say that's not realistic. I have to disagree because, right now I'm wearing a thick parka, and that has multiple pockets, which adds layers. Then behind that, I have snow pant material. Behind that, I have one of these type of sweatshirts. Behind that, I have a t-shirt. Now, if you were to hit from a side and go through a pocket where it contains one of these insulated gloves or something like that, yeah, you would easily have that much material you're working with to try to get through. So this should be a very interesting test here. So I'm going to use my Taurus G2C and 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson. Those have a 3.2 inch barrel. Our Smith & Wesson M&P 45 Shield 3.3 inch barrel, and my Taurus 605 357 Magnum with a 2 inch barrel. These actually all have exactly the same amount of barrel travel in those guns, 3.2 inches, and this 2 inch revolver here. I've done the measurements on them. The nose of the bullets are exactly the same length, and then with the 45, instead of 3.2, it's a 3.3 inch barrel, but the actual cartridge of a 45 is about 1/10 of an inch longer than a 9mm or a 40. So this should be a really interesting comparison. So I'm just basically going to run what I found. This is not ammo that I went through and said I'm going to use that. I'm not cherry picking them. The only thing I did here was I picked ammunition that's either bonded or mechanically banded that is law enforcement quality. So basically I'm going to do 2 gel tests, 4 shots in each gel block with just various ammo here. So for the 9mm, I got some Golden Saber bonded 9mm plus P 124 grain, and some short barrel 9mm gold dot short barrel 124 grain plus P. For the 40 Smith & Wesson, I got some Federal Punch. Dan did provide this ammo, 165 grain, and some Federal HST 165 grain. For the 45 ACP, I got some 45 ACP plus P 230 grain HST. And then I also have the 200 grain gold dot plus P. Then for the 357 Magnum, I have a 135 grain short barrel, and then I have a 125 grain Defender. So this should be very interesting. I'm just going to go through this fabric and into my real world simulation with all of these shots. So I do have the chronograph up in front to try to catch these impact velocities. So we're going to go through all that layer of fabric. 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Another 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent back fat after going through the ribs, and then another layer of this fabric here. So clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches, and another 1.5 inches would represent that there. So really what this is, combine those two things, it's like 3 inches and then this 8. So it's really like going through about 11-inch thick individual if we go through that. So that'll tell us if we pass through or not. So this should be a really interesting test. So let's get started with this test. All right, so our heavy winter clothing real world simulation, about 10 layers of sweatshirt and snow pant type material, 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back, 3 more inches, and then some more sweatshirt material. So I'm going to fire a couple shots from 2 different calibers, go up and take a look, and then move on. So our first 2 are going to be our gold dot short barrel 9mm 124 grain plus P, and our Federal HST 40 caliber 165 grain. So here is our gold dot short barrel 9mm. All right, Now here is our Federal HST 40 Smith & Wesson 165 grain. Let's go take a look. All right, so both of those seem to have had a little bit of issue with getting hollow point expansion. And both of them are expanded a little bit and a little bit deformed. Energy dump in this first 3 inches here is a little bit more with the HST 40. That could just have to do with the manufacturer, because HST is a pretty good bullet, and definitely more damage with our 40. But you know, looking at the penetration, there's not a big difference here. With our 9mm plus P, we got 17 inches. And with our 40 Smith & Wesson, I'll call it 17¼ inches. So very comparable there. Now let's move on and compare our 45 ACP HST to our Speer Gold Dot Short Barrel 357 Magnum. I totally forgot to call out the velocity reads. That 40 caliber is 1045. It might have said on there, you might be able to pick up with the camera what it said with the 9mm, but I forgot to call that out. So next up, let's hit it with our Federal HST 45 ACP plus P 230 grain. I don't know if we're going to get expansion on this. I haven't even tested this in a regular test of this pistol yet, but let's see what we got with our 45. 797 feet per second. Now our 357 Magnum Speer Gold Dot 135 grain. 1,015 feet per second. Let's go take a look. All right, so looking at this, you know, I thought for sure that 357 would do a lot better than the 45, but you know, and it has more energy dump in this first 3 inches than the 45, but that 45 has a more consistent path. It is, you know, expanded out a little bit, and there's just a lot more damage going on there. So with our 357 Magnum, and this is a short barrel load, so you know, you kind of got to judge this accordingly. This is 12 inches of penetration, a little bit low. With our 45 ACP plus P, we're at about 15¼ inches. So looking at this, you know, it's hard to say which of these did the best. You know, based on the damage alone, I'm going to say our 40 did the most damage. And the lowest is actually our 357 Magnum, but that is a short barreled variant. You really can't judge that. You know, it really is hard to judge that because it is a specific load. That's why I brought out a different full power load for the next test here. So very interesting results overall. Our 40 probably did the best. And here's our MDF shots, our 9mm, our 40. And this is from an old impact. This is an older piece that was already there. And then this is our 357. This is our 357, and this is our 45. So it does look like the 357 is tumbling a little bit. And honestly, it looks like the 40 and the 45 are as well. And the 9mm went straight through. So just very interesting there overall. So I'd say our 40 is the best. Our 9mm and our 45 are pretty equal, honestly. And then our short barrel 357 didn't do so good. So let's redo this test with some different ammo now. All right, I swapped our first 3-inch pieces, swapped our fabric, I put on a new piece of MDF, and we're good to go on our second test here of the same calibers, but different ammo. So first up, we have our Golden Saber bonded 9mm plus P. It's a 124 grain jacket at hollow point. Let's see how this does. No velocity read on that. Chronograph just didn't pick it up. Now we have our 40. This is our Federal Punch 165 grain. Same weight as that HST, very similar bullet design. So let's see what we get with our 40 here. 1,011 feet per second. All right, let's go take a look. All right, so our 9mm and our 40 didn't expand at all with these, which is interesting. I thought the punch would do as well as that HST, but it looks like, I guess it is slightly an inferior design there. So what we got with our 9mm Golden Saber bonded, both of these don't have really much energy dump. We have tumbling damage there. With our 9mm, we got 16.5 inches. And with our 40 caliber, we went right to that rib simulation. So that's 19 inches. Interesting. Now let's try our 45 and our 357 Magnum now. All right, we have our 45 ACP plus P 200 grain spear gold dot. This is a beast of a round. Did pretty well in my regular testing. So let's see what we get here for our heavy winter clothing test. 940 feet per second. All right. Next up, we have our Winchester Defender, used to be called the PDX-1, 125 grain, jacket at hollow point, bonded. Let's see how this does. 1290 feet per second. That's a powerful round. Let's go take a look. All right, so it appears that 45 kind of touched that 9mm bullet, but I don't think it really did much damage there because, you know, it was already at the end of its path, and I don't think that would have went any further. So I'm gonna count that as valid. So interesting here. So let's take a look at our rip simulations. Our 9mm starting to tumble a little bit based on that heavy fabric. Our 40 is tumbling a lot. Our 45 is tumbling. So we're seeing a pattern here of this thick fabric causes a bullet to not hit perfectly straight and wobble, and that will, you know, if the nose doesn't hit flat, it's not going to expand right. But our 357 Magnum did perfectly fine. So what we got going on with the 45 ACP is not a ton of damage. I mean, it's okay. But we went to 16 3/4 inches of penetration. With our 357 Magnum, we went to about 14.5 inches and a huge track there. And we have a lot of energy dump up there also in that first 3-inch piece there. So what I'm seeing here is, you know, velocity is king pretty much with this type of thing. Because the fastest round did the best. And I know a lot of people will be like, oh, I could have told you that. People say that after they see this, but that seems to be the case here with this. And another thing is, you know, 9mm and 40 aren't significantly different. I mean, they're a little bit different in this test, and consistently the 40 does penetrate just a little bit more. And all the testing I've done to the 9mm, they're very similar though. But the 40 does penetrate just a hair more usually. Now the 45. In this testing with two different power levels and everything, it seemed more consistent. You know, it was kind of like, I would say it's a little better than the 40, to be honest here. Just because it didn't do wild things. It just seemed a little bit more consistent between two different types of loads. You know, and that's impressive, being that there are 30 grain difference between those particular loads. And I've seen that across the board with 45. You know, it's kind of consistent on what it does. But obviously, I got to give this to the 357 Magnum. A full powered 357 Magnum is where it's at. The short barreled version, didn't do that good. So overall, our our full powered ammo 357, You know, so that's going to be what I would recommend to carry in the winter time if you're really concerned about this type of thing, because the penetration actually was not lowered by the fabric, because that's about what we got in plain gel in our regular simulation with that 357 Magnum. So I'm going to say velocity is where it's at, and then arguing between 9, 40, and 45 is somewhat silly. Now, I would say our 40 and 45 just consistently have higher stopping power numbers than 9mm. And when we look at testing like this, they do tend to go a little bit deeper on average than 9mm, but the differences aren't significant. So the real difference is getting into velocity. So I would say your 357 Magnum snub, or maybe a 357 SIG with a shorter barrel, would be where it's at for wintertime carry. So that's just my opinion. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. Here's our 9mm. Here's our 40 calibers. Here's our 45s. And here's our 357 Magnums. And I'm going to have to say, at least with these ammo choices, it looks like our 9mm didn't do so well, did the worst. Here's that Golden Saber bonded. And not really a whole lot going on with that. And here's our 9mm gold dot short barrel. Inconsistent expansion. Our 40 calibers, here's our HST and here's our punch. And these bullets are very similar looking from the outside, but they are completely different. So here is our HST 40 caliber. You know, and kind of an inconsistent expansion again, but at least it has some big thick petals going on with our HST 40. Now our punch 40, no expansion. So it's just interesting because these are the same bullet weights, very similar construction, but obviously there is a difference there. Now when we look at our 45s, here is our HST 230 grain. For what it is, that's not bad. You know, the expansion isn't super consistent, but that's still big expanded petals there. I mean, this is massive. If you compare it to the partial expanded gold dot short barrel, you know, I can't say this expanded necessarily more consistently, but obviously it's a lot bigger there. So for what it is, it's a pretty good bullet. And again, we got this weird half expansion with our gold dot 45, about the same as what we got with the gold dot 9mm. It's just that, yeah, it started out a lot bigger. It's going to make a bigger hole. So that's the advantage of the 45. And again, the gold dot did the exact same thing as it did with the other calibers with the 357 Magnum. Now this expansion is a little bit bigger than the 9mm gold dot's expansion. Right, here's our 357. This sword is similar in a lot of ways. And then our clear winner is a full-powered 357 Magnum. Now what's interesting about this is only rated at 1325 feet per second through a 4-inch barrel. And it's because they're using a very fast powder with this particular load. So you actually get less recoil than a typical full-powered 357 Magnum, but you still get full energy. So honestly, this is not a bad round of ammunition for a snub. It really is kind of tailored to a snub. So our clear winner there is our 357 Magnum if you get enough velocity. Now overall consistency of this test, I'm going to say our 45 is probably the next best choice, because even with that mediocre expansion, it doesn't matter. It's huge. The petals that do expand are huge, a lot bigger than the 40 even. Then our third best here is going to be our 40 caliber, because, you know, we got pretty good expansion here. And then our 9mm, it looks like our 9mm really struggles the most in this type of testing. So interesting here. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. So thank you to Dan the Wolfman for inspiring this idea and for sending some ammo. And he's got other ammo he's sent for other testing. So very interesting here. So go check out Dan the Wolfman, subscribe to him. He does a lot of the same stuff that I do on here. So we've been YouTube friends for a long time. He's been a supporter of the channel for a long time. So go sub to him. Very cool content over there. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.